People talk about how the world feels off. They say supermarkets hum like hives, and the cashiers never look tired. That traffic flows like a sequence someone planned in a studio, or that you can stand in a crowd and feel nothing coming back at you. I never liked those claims. I try to verify before I lean in. Still, some cases make it hard to sit in the middle. This one started with a voicemail from a listener named Daniel. He sounded careful, like a man testing a loose stair. He said he'd documents about his family line that didn't make sense, and scans of a medieval manuscript he'd no business having, and a leak that had put his job on the floor if anyone connected it to him. He didn't start with the leak. He started with his last name and the fact that it seemed to appear in Europe like a bird that learned to fly in one afternoon, and then forgot how it learned. I called him back that night and let him talk.
My line begins in the 13th century. There's nothing before it. I don't mean we lost the baptism records. I mean there's a wall. The name appears in 3 parishes in the same decade and then spreads from there, and before that decade there isn't one record of it. No variant, no Latin root, no court roll, nothing. Then there's something else. A gap. The monks write as if people came from nowhere.
Which monks? He took a breath.
A ruined abbey near the Rhine. I'm not saying the name on a line. I shouldn't even have the scans. A friend in archives sent them to me because he thought I'd be amused. He thought they were a forgery. He thought the hand was wrong for the date. But the vellum tested clean.
You had it tested?
No, he had it tested. He felt safe because the abbey is rubble and everyone who cared about it died in a small war that no one lists in school books. The manuscript came to a museum in the 50s in a crate of ecclesiastical odds and ends. It's no accession ledger. It shouldn't exist.
All right. Walk me through what the monks wrote.
They recorded a time when towns burned without flame. They wrote about men born without spark. Not dead, born. Walking, speaking, trading, marrying, dying. But wrong. The phrase repeats. Without spark. The abbot draws a bell in the margin and writes that it rang for the empty and never for the filled. He writes that during the gap the bell rang every morning.
He stopped. I heard a sound in the line that could have been his thumb against his teeth. What gap?
You know the idea, people call it the phantom years. The claim that 3 centuries of early medieval time were padded or invented. The historians laugh and point to coins and eclipses. I thought it was a crank theory. Then I read the manuscript. You can laugh now too.
I'm not laughing. Send the scans. If they're noise, I'll tell you. He sent them in a link that I opened on a laptop I kept off the grid. The images loaded in slow blocks like winter light. The hand was even and cramped, and the text ran through the page without spacing between words. The margin had the bell, and the ink had bled along the flesh of the page in fine hairline fractures. It looked right. That didn't mean it was true. That meant it had survived. I called a medievalist I trusted, a woman named Dr. Marin. She didn't like press, didn't like my show, and didn't like being asked to comment on anonymous scans. She didn't hang up because she respects the work. I sent her 2 pages and asked her to withhold judgment and tell me what the text said.
The language is Latin by a clerk who clearly learned in a bad school. The abbreviations are strange, but not impossible. The letter forms sit late 12th century to early 13th. The pigments match the period if the photos are honest. The syntax reads like someone copied something older and modernized it line by line. That happened often. I'd like to see the foliation and the binding. I can't, can I?
Not yet, she grunted.
Damn. Well, the phrase you asked about, without spark, it reads sine scintilla. That's odd. They use anima for soul elsewhere in the same hand. Spark is closer to a technical term. There are lines here about vats. The clerk uses dolia hominum, vats of men. That phrase isn't a joke. It sits in a list near wax, lime, and salt. He's inventorying The tone is plain. The bell in the margin looks like a fair drawing from life. It's a double lip and a long yoke. Those didn't appear in that region until later, but the drawing isn't careful enough to date. There's also a line about a well that doesn't draw water. It draws names. I've never seen that line anywhere else.
Do you think it's a modern fake?
Honestly, I don't know. I want to say yes because it touches too many nerves. But fakes like to brag. This one drifts. The clerk complains about a draft in the scriptorium and writes about a cracked knuckle. That's hard to fake without a sense of how boring life is.
I told her I'd send more if I could. She told me not to send anything over the open internet again unless I wanted to spend the next year apologizing to people I admire. Then she asked the only question that mattered.
Why do you care?
Because Daniel's not the first person to say his line starts too clean. And because I've heard a bell like the drawing. I heard it once while cutting audio from a field recorder a paramedic kept in his pocket 30 years ago. It rang at 5:31 in the morning. I asked him about it. He told me he'd never heard it, and that the file in question didn't exist. Marin was quiet.
Send me one more page. The one with the well that draws names. If it repeats the line, I'll take this more seriously than I should.
I sent the page. She didn't respond that night. Daniel called at 3 in the morning. I picked up and didn't bother to be tired.
I found something else. You asked me to go slow. I didn't. I took my wife's birth records from the county site. I pulled the hospital logs. They show a delivery room assigned to her mother on the day she was born. The room logs 3 nurses and a physician. The physician died in 1996. The nurses are alive. One says she worked the shift. The other 2 don't show up anywhere. I mean, nowhere. No licenses, no tax records, no obituaries. The shift record looks right until you look at the names. Then it looks like a script. I feel stupid saying this out loud.
It's all right. You don't need to jump to the largest claim. Start with the small ones. 2 names failed to resolve. That happens. What else?
The birth certificate number matches the county series. The hospital record shows a heart rate log for the infant. The pattern is near flat with small excursions. I asked a friend what that meant. He told me to stop playing with medical data.
You can send it to me. I know people who know how to read logs.
I'm not sure. Each time I pull something like this, I get a call from an unlisted number, and no one is there. The calls come 24 hours before I pull the thing. They don't threaten me. They're timing marks.
I told him to use a fresh account. I told him to send me the files he felt safe sending. He told me he'd call the next afternoon, and hung up. I went to bed and stared at the ceiling for an hour. The cabin settled. Somewhere a raccoon put its weight on the porch rail and tested it. The refrigerator motor clicked and then stopped. I tried the phrase again in my head, without spark. It's the kind of phrase clerks lean on when they don't want to use a loaded word. Soul is for sermons. Spark is for recipes. Marin emailed me at 6. She'd stayed up with the page. She wrote in clipped lines like a lab notebook.
The phrase repeats. The well that draws names appears in a second section that describes a census. The clerk writes the names of those who live near the abbey, then writes the names the well gives when they ring the bell. The lists match in count, but not in content. He writes, "In the year of our hunger we drew from the well and found 3 and 4 unlit." He writes that they fed the unlit first because the unlit didn't ask for more than bread. He writes that the lit left during the gap and didn't come back the same. If this is a forgery, it's a patient one. If it's true, I don't have a job title for it.
I called her. Dolium vats. Did he mean wine vats?
I think he meant what you think he meant. There are marginal drawings near those entries that look like copper kettles with pipes. Monks boiled soap and tanned hides and brewed. A vat is a vat. But there's a line here about flesh and chalk. I can't place it. You won't show this to anyone else.
I'll keep it quiet. She paused.
Evan, if the numbers in this text are real, The ratio comes out to 3 and 4 without spark. It can't be real. That'd mean we live in a world where most people don't have what the clerk calls anime and what we call mind, and we'd know. We'd feel it. We'd be alone whenever we walked outside. We don't feel that. Do you?
I try not to trust feelings, but that's the claim some listeners make. They say they feel like they're alone in a crowd.
People say many things when they're lonely. Watch your footing.
I promised her I would, and then I didn't. I asked Daniel for his leak. He told me he worked with biometric systems at a contractor that supplied equipment to hospitals and border posts. He didn't name the contractor. He didn't have to. The file names in the leak used a code I'd seen before. I opened a sample set. It contained EEG segments recorded during routine intake and triage. The signals were anonymized and indexed by rolling identifiers. The summaries included simple features, not raw waveforms. I saw ratios. Frontal alpha power was near baseline and didn't change under tasks that should have moved it. P300 responses were absent in most sets. Amygdala spikes appeared normal under startle. The blink artifacts were clean. The face recognition task showed nothing. Not low. Nothing. The code column called that state quiet. I called a neuroscientist I knew who would speak plainly without signing a contract. I asked what would cause no P300 at all in a large group.
Bad gear, or a barbette, or tasks designed to mask the component, so you can sell a paper. Or you're not looking at humans. What the hell are you doing, Evan?
Just looking at an export I shouldn't have is normal.
Well, the quiet tag repeats in about 75% of the sets.
He went silent.
You don't have a sample that big? Tell me you don't.
I do. I shouldn't. But I do.
Delete it. You can't hold that. You don't want to know who wants it back. Also, P300 isn't a soul meter. If you say this on the air, you do damage you can't measure.
I'm not rushing to air. I'm trying to understand what I'm seeing. If the component is flat in 3/4 of a population sample, what does that mean in dull terms?
It means the task is wrong, or the apparatus is wrong, or the sample is biased. If you force me to say you're not wrong, then it means the frontal cortex doesn't register a surprise signal in most of the people you tested. That'd be stranger than any creature story you've put to tape. That'd mean our models of attention are wrong, or the signals you have came from bodies where attention lives somewhere else or doesn't exist the way we assume. It doesn't mean souls. Do you hear me?
I hear you. He hung up on the word "here." I put the leak on a drive and locked it in a case on the bottom shelf of a closet I never used. I called Daniel. You were right to be afraid of the timing marks. Whoever's calling you knows the path you're about to take.
Can you help me test something without dragging you under the same eyes?
No, but we're in it now, so just ask.
I want to test my wife without her knowing.
He stopped like he'd pushed a word he wished he could pull back.
No, that sounds ugly. I want to test the idea without turning her into an experiment. She wouldn't forgive me for that. I want to know if it's my head, and this is the only way I have to check. There's a simple face recognition task in the leak. I can build it into a game. I can log the signals with a headband and never save her name. If she's quiet, it doesn't mean she's not real. It means the headband is junk. If she's not quiet, it means the leak is junk. Either way, I get to stop chasing the wall with a spoon.
You don't need my permission, but you'll need to live with how you feel about it. If you're asking whether I think the task will find anything, I don't. If you're asking whether I think your fear will go away when you get a result, I don't. He exhaled.
I know, but if I do nothing, the fear grows teeth.
Then do something small, a test you can undo. He built the game that week and told me he'd not talk about it until he was done. I made coffee I didn't want and read the manuscript scans with a ruler under each line. The clerk listed strong soap, lime, chalk, and flesh. The clerk wrote that chalk kept the flesh from slipping the form. The clerk drew a crude box around a word that could have been seed if seed were a substance you could pour. I closed the scan and rubbed my eyes. Marin called that night.
Your leak is bleeding. One of my students saw a table of numbers with a quiet column and asked me if anyone had ever proved that attention was a minority trait. I told her the opposite. Then I asked where she saw the table. She told me it was in a forum thread about urban isolation. She'd not give me the link. I think she thought she was protecting me. If your friend posted anything, tell him to stop.
He didn't. It's moving anyway.
You don't need me to tell you what happens next. Someone who knows the quiet column is a crude flag will use it to sort people. Someone will say it was always obvious. Someone will try to sell it. You should pull away now. I'm not saying this because I'm fragile. I'm saying this because I don't think you can steer the car once you get in.
I'm already in the car. I'll keep my hands near the wheel, she sighed.
Then speak to a man named Rios. He worked in a program that studied attention markers for a federal group that had no patience for journals. He didn't enjoy the work. He'll talk if you don't record him.
Do you trust him?
I trust that he hates the place that paid him. He's careful, and he's not a hero. That makes him better than most.
Rios met me in a diner, off a frontage road, where the coffee tasted like burnt paper. He had a short beard and the posture of a man who didn't want to display his hands. He asked for no names. Then, he asked for my phone and put it in a tin beside his. He watched the door, even when he looked at me.
You have a leak. You think it shows 3/4 of the world are quiet. You want someone to tell you you read the column wrong.
You can start there.
The column isn't a soul count. It flags a pattern in a simple task that many people fail in a lab. Our devices were sloppy. Our tasks were lazy. That's what I thought for 2 years while I wrote batch jobs to clean the curves. Then I worked intake on a small pilot and saw it in a room. People came in with normal steps and warm hands and a light in the eye. 1 in 4 had the event you want to see when you clap near someone. The others didn't. Their bodies reacted. Their faces didn't process. I told myself it was equipment. I told myself the signal hid in noise. I told myself I was cruel for looking.
He lifted his coffee and set it back down without drinking.
I'm not telling you those people were not real. I'm telling you the signal we were trained to call the trace of attention didn't appear when we expected it. We made a few other tasks. They didn't register either. We didn't publish. The program ran out of money or moved to a room with no windows. I don't know which. I left with one conclusion. Whatever we are measuring when we measure surprise in the frontal cortex doesn't appear to be universal. It might be a feature of a subset. It might not be a feature of humanity at all. Maybe it's a side effect of education. Maybe it's a luxury. Maybe souls have nothing to do with electricity.
What did you call the people who didn't register? He looked out the window as if counting pickups.
We called them NPAs when we were being clinical. Non-phenomenal agents. It was a joke someone made and then no one stopped saying it. It was wrong. It led people by the nose. You can hear how wrong it is. The better term was quiet. We didn't get to keep it. Someone else took it and turned it into a filter for hiring.
Is there anything you didn't test that you wish you did? He smiled without pleasure.
I wish we had tested the people who built the machines, but we never did. They were busy. Their time was valuable.
He slid my phone back across the table.
Don't call me again. If you're smart, you'll tell your friend to stop trying to sort his family with a toy.
I didn't promise him anything. He didn't ask me to. Daniel stayed quiet for 4 days, then sent me a message that said only I have to talk to you in person. He gave me an address that led to a shaded street with brick houses and old trees that had pushed the sidewalks into gentle ridges. He stood on the porch as if he'd never seen it. He let me in and walked me to a table covered in printer paper and tape. He'd made maps of names and lines between them.
I ran the game. I used it like a party trick. I put it on the television and told my wife I was working on user experience and needed feedback. She played. She laughed when the headband slipped. She told me my color choices were bad. She scored well on the task. The headband streamed clean. The markers didn't spike where the paper says they should. They didn't spike anywhere. Evan, if the device is right, her signal is quiet.
He put both hands on the back of a chair and looked at the grain in the wood.
I didn't tell her. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself the headband was a toy. I ran it on myself when she went to bed. I spiked it all the right places. Then I told myself my bias made me see it that way. I tried it the next morning and got different results. I spent 2 days doing that and made myself sick.
What else did you do?
I pulled the people in our circle. Friends, neighbors, coworkers. I didn't lie to them. I told them I was testing a game. Most of them were quiet on the headband. A few weren't. The ones who weren't felt familiar in a way I can't describe without insulting everyone else I love.
You don't need to finish that sentence.
I know. I don't like the kind of person it makes me. I kept thinking about the manuscript, the bell, the clerk who never uses the word soul. It's as if he didn't want to pick a fight with the choir.
He led me into a small bedroom with a desk that held a printout of a hospital log and a graph with a straight line.
This is the heart rate record I told you about. The infant baseline is low. The excursions are shallow. It could be a normal log. I don't know. I tried to match the pattern in other infants. I couldn't find a match. That doesn't mean anything. Records from that year are a mess.
He closed his eyes and stood there, not talking, like a man who had walked out on a frozen lake and realized he could not remember which direction led to shore.
I love my wife. She's kind and steady and does the same crossword every morning and hates olives and calls me from the car if she sees a dog in trouble. She also never startles. That isn't a complaint. It's something I only noticed when I started looking for it. I've never caught her with a spark of surprise in her face. I don't know when that became a test for me. I hate that I'm thinking this way.
You can stop the test. You can decide that you don't want to turn your life into a lab. He nodded and didn't move.
That seems like the right answer. Then the calls come.
What calls?
Unlisted. No one speaks. The first one came 24 hours before I opened the manuscript. The next came 24 hours before I ran the game. The last one came last night. I've not done anything since then. I don't know what that means.
It means someone is shadowing you with a delay. It's a signal. It's also bait. He smiled in a way that showed how thin he felt.
Do you think they want me to keep going?
I think they want you to get used to being watched. I took my copy of the scans and left him with the maps. I drove back to the cabin on small roads and past a school where a soccer game had just ended. Parents bent to pick up water bottles. Kids ran in arcs like bright birds. I felt nothing proof-like. If you asked me then, I'd have told you the world looked fine. Marin called and told me a professor in England had posted an image of a bell from a ruined abbey that matched our drawing. She called it convergent error. She was trying to build a case for fraud and didn't enjoy that it kept failing to hold. Rios texted me 3 words. It will move. On the 5th day, Daniel didn't answer his phone. He didn't answer on the 6th. I drove to his street and saw a new lock on the door and a white van with a logo for a water service. The van had a new plate and old tires. I knocked. No one came. A flyer from a hardware store sat on the mat with the day's date. The curtains were wrong. They were not his curtains. I called the number on the van and reached a pizza place. I wrote the plate down, then told myself I was inventing patterns. I walked to the neighbor's porch and asked if they had seen Daniel. An older man with a shirt that said a bait shop's name told me a couple had moved out 2 days ago.
Nice, folks. Quiet. They didn't leave a mess. That's rare. You know them?
I thought I did. He tipped his head.
They had movers, not the kind with uniforms. Unmarked truck. Good backs. You know how you can tell when someone has moved before. They looked like that. The woman waved. The man didn't.
Did she say where they were going?
No, she said they were going to do some work on a house before the weather turned.
I left a card with my number and a request to call me if the couple came back to pick up a package. I knew they wouldn't. Marin's email arrived that night. It said only, "I think your clerk saw something real and wrote it as straight as he could." Then it said, "That doesn't mean we should go hunting for bells." I slept badly and woke to the cabin making a sound I'd never heard. It sounded like a voice from far away. It was my phone on the counter, playing an old message in a loop. The message was from Daniel the first week. I picked up the phone and stopped the loop. Then I saw a new message from an unfamiliar number. It was an audio file. It had no text. I played it. I heard a door close. I heard Daniel breathing the way people breathe, when they're trying not to sound like they're breathing. He whispered, as if the room didn't want to hear him.
I'm in the mirror. I don't know how to say that without sounding like an idiot. I'm looking and eyes don't do the thing. You know what I mean. Light goes in and comes back. It makes a small shine even when the room is dark. It isn't there. The iris looks like a picture of an iris. I've never noticed that. Why would I notice that? I tried to startle myself. I clapped. I dropped a book. I played a video with a loud sound. The body jumped. The face didn't change. It's the headband. It's the leak. It's the script. I know all the ways to explain this away. I'm saying them into the phone, and none of them matter because the eyes look like glass. I don't want to be one of them. If there's a them. If there isn't, I'm losing my mind. I'm going to leave the house and walk into the street and look at people until something changes. If I don't send another message, tell my wife I tried to fix it. You won't be able to reach her. That isn't a threat. That's a guess.
The file ended with a small sound that could have been him putting the phone on the sink. I wrote the number down and called it. It rang and then went to a carrier message that had the same voice I hear in every state. I sent the file to Marin and asked her for words I could use that didn't sound like a man pulling apart his own face. She wrote back and told me not to diagnose. She told me to bring tea and sit in a chair and wait. She told me to call his wife and ask if he was safe. I didn't have a way to do that without injecting myself into their life in a way that did not belong. I drove to the address again. The van was gone. The curtains were still wrong. I left a note under the door with 2 sentences. You can call me Collect. I'll talk about the weather for 10 minutes, and then hang up. Night came early. I sat with the recorder on the table and listened to the house talk. The heater clicked on. The pine outside scraped the window with a sound like a match on a stone. I thought about the clockwork feel in some rooms and whether it came from the room or from me. Then the phone rang. The number was blocked. I picked up.
I told you not to call me again. I'm calling you.
You heard the file?
I didn't hear your file. I don't need to. The thing goes the way it goes. A leak shows a number. Someone who loves a person uses it like a test. The test breaks whatever trust was there. It doesn't matter what the result is. The trust is the first thing that goes. Then the person goes. Then the files go. Then the house goes. The only thing left is the idea. And the idea is the kind of fire that looks small until the wind spins. I'm telling you because it will make you feel like you can do something. You can't. You can stack the paper and make a neat pile, and then you can let the pile sit until it stops smoking.
Where did he go?
Where the movers go, they have places. If he's lucky, he'll be back in a year with a new lock on his head. If he's not, he'll be back in 2.
Is there a right thing to do here?
There was a right thing 2 weeks ago. Now there's only distance. Do you know the thing we never printed on a slide? It's the part your monk got right. You don't need a soul word. You need a behavior word. People have enough. Some have more than enough. Some have less. It isn't a ladder. It isn't a test you take one day. It isn't a map. It's a blotchy field. You stand in it and feel wind in patches. That's it. That's the answer. And it isn't clean enough to sell, so no one likes it.
You could have said that in the diner.
I wanted to see if you would leave it alone when a quiet word was not spicy enough. You didn't. Few do.
He hung up before I could ask him why he cared enough to call. I sat there and felt the dull throb I get in the temple when a case goes from evidence to noise, and there's no clean way to cut it apart. In the morning, I drove to Marin's office with a printout of the bell drawing and a thermos of coffee that tasted like the cabin's dust. She held the print between her fingers like a ticket at a train station.
I read the last page you sent twice. The clerk writes the list of names that the well gave when they rang the bell. He writes that they drew names and then issued bread and recorded who asked for more. It's a cruel test and a poor one, and it tells you more about the men who built the well than the people who ate the bread. He writes that they chose the ones who asked for more to carry water on the road because they wouldn't drop the load in a storm. I hate that test. I hate that it probably worked for what they needed, and then it says the same thing your leak says. People have different responses when you poke them in the head and when you starve them. We already knew that, but we like to forget. It feels better to think everyone is the same, and a little better to think only 1 in 4 are lit up like a town, because then you get to place yourself in the lit quarter.
Do you think the vats were real?
I think someone boiled something with chalk. I think you can make a lot of ugly paste with chalk and the things a monastery had in the yard. I think people have been copying people with whatever lay at hand since they first saw a reflection. The phrase "without spark" bothers me because it reads like someone trying to describe a thing that didn't fit a sermon. It sounds like a person who liked to use their hands.
She set the page down.
If your friend calls you, tell him to stop running games on his life. Tell him to go to a place where he can't check a signal and get tired on purpose. It's the only counsel I have that isn't a lie.
He didn't call. The neighbor didn't call. The plate on the van didn't resolve any better the second time I tried. The leaks stirred across corners of the net like ash in a shallow wind, fell into a few message boards, and then disappeared behind dead links and 404s. A white paper with a bland title appeared on a preprint server, then vanished. The authors had 3 vowels between them and didn't exist. A company I'll not name released a new feature that promised better alignment between worker and role. It used eye tracking. It had a slider. I watched a demo reel where everyone in the office looked delighted. I cut tape for a different episode and thought I'd moved on. I told myself I had no story because I had no subject. Then a letter arrived in a plain envelope. It had a postmark from a small town I didn't know. It held 1 page. The paper was the kind you buy when you want something to feel official but don't want to pay for a watermark. The handwriting was steady. It didn't say who wrote it. It said, "We fed the ones who asked for more, and that the bell didn't ring after the thaw." It said, "You should stop asking about the well." I held it up to the light. The fibers made a pattern that looked like a net. I put the letter in a folder with the printouts and the graphs and the line from the monk about flesh and chalk. I sat for a long time with the folder on my lap and thought about markets and schools and buses and everything else that lives on the quiet hum of people moving through days. If you're waiting for me to say I felt like 3 and 4 of them were empty, I didn't. I felt like I always feel. Some faces look back at you. Some pass by like wind does. The part that bothered me didn't live in a number. It lived in how easy it's to turn a person you love into a test bench once someone gives you a tool with a slider and a chart. I told the recorder the same thing. I said I don't know what the monks saw, and I don't know what the leak measured, and I don't know where Daniel went. I said the only piece I trust is the pattern where an idea enters a house and rearranges the furniture even when you don't touch a thing. If there was a well that drew names, it's the same well that modern people draw from when they speak about spark and emptiness. You lower the bucket and dread fills it before the water comes. Then someone rings a bell and tells you who gets bread. I ended the take and sat in the soft hiss of the room. The heater clicked off. The clock ticked. I waited for the phone to ring and it didn't. I cleaned the kitchen counter with the side of my hand and left a streak I could see when the light hit right. I washed it off and watched the water run clear. I thought of chalk and flesh and wished the clerk had written less about recipes and more about the faces of the men who stood by the well. 2 weeks later, a package came to a post office box I used for work. It held a thumb drive and a note that said only, "If you play this, play it alone." It had no return name. It had a smudge of oil on the corner like a mechanic had handled it. I took it to the cabin and plugged it into a laptop that had never touched the rest of my life. The drive held a single video file and a folder of logs. The video opened on a staircase in a dim hallway. A man carried the camera down the stairs and breathed through his mouth. The camera shook. It came to a door and turned to show a small bell hanging from a beam. The bell looked like the drawing. The lip had the same curve. The yoke had the same notch. The man lifted the clapper with 2 fingers and let it fall. The sound was not loud. It had a dry body and a long tail. It rang the way old metal rings when it's made a lot of sound and doesn't want to show off. The camera pointed at a shallow well. It was not a well, it was a square hole, lined with stone that held not water but something dark like oil. The surface moved even when the air didn't. It puckered in a slow pattern like breath in a sleeping chest. The man whispered a name. The surface made a ripple that spelled nothing. He whispered a second name. The surface didn't change. He whispered a third. The surface sank. A bubble came up and broke without a mark. The file jumped to a different frame. The man had set the camera on a crate. He stood in front of the bell with a sheet of paper and read a list. The bell rang in short taps as if the clapper moved on its own. The surface moved. Letters rose and fell. They didn't spell the names he read. They spelled different names in crude human script. Some I recognized from the monk's list. Some I recognized from Daniel's maps. Some I recognized from my inbox. The camera cut to a shot of a ledger on a table. It looked new. The paper was unlined. The ink was the kind you find in a pen you buy at a drugstore. The ledger had 2 columns. The left said bread. The right said load. The names from the bells sat under one or the other. The handwriting split households. I felt the same anger I felt when I read The Monk. Someone had made a simple plan and given it the weight of fate. Someone would tell a story about how it worked. The video ended with a tight shot of the bell. The clapper wore a dark smear. The yoke had a hairline crack. A label on the inside lip had a stamp with a number and a month and an abbreviation for a year that looked like a joke. The logs in the folder gave a location that had placed the room under a building that didn't list a basement. The file modification times were jittered. The system clock had been set wrong on purpose. I sat there and waited for the next call. It didn't come that night. I copied the video to 2 drives and put them in 2 different places and didn't upload anything. I called Rios from a payphone that still took coins and told him I'd seen the bell.
You saw a bell. You saw a room. You didn't see the thing it claims to measure. That's the point. They know you'll fill it in for them with your own fear. They set the table and let you bring the first course.
Is it yours?
It's someone's. Don't say the address out loud. Don't write it down. Pretend your eyes didn't read it. Walk away.
Marin will want to see it.
She will tell you the bell was made last decade by a foundry that makes antiques for movies. She will tell you the ledger paper is from a chain store. She will be right. And it won't matter, because the bell still rings in your head. That's what they know. The sound stays.
He was right. The sound stayed. I cut it out of the video and put it on loop and played it for an hour in the cabin to see if it would turn into something else when it got familiar. It didn't. It stayed itself. It sank into the noise floor where the fridge motor and the road far away live. 2 months passed. The leak went quiet. The phrase quiet became a brand for a line of peripheral devices that promised better focus. The ad copy read like it had been written by a person who had not slept. A documentary production company asked me for comment on a story about medieval hoaxes. I didn't reply. Marin presented a paper on the use of technical metaphors in monastic chronicles and didn't cite our clerk. Rio sent a picture of a lake with no message and no return number. I stood in a grocery store and watched a woman choose a cantaloupe by smell and thought about how much truth fits in a small movement like that. On a rainy night in late fall, I got a letter in Daniel's hand. It gave no address and no phone. It was 3 paragraphs. He wrote that he'd gone away for a while and had been shown a series of rooms where he could practice ignoring. He wrote that he'd learned to stop testing and that it made him feel less like a bad priest. He wrote that he could watch his wife stir soup and not look for a startle in her face when the spoon hit the pot. He wrote that he knew some people would hear that and think he'd given up. He wrote that he'd not. He wrote that he'd decided to hold his life like a full glass and walk carefully. Not because the liquid was rare, but because making a mess wouldn't prove anything. He wrote that he'd made peace with the word quiet. He wrote that he'd thrown the headband away. He wrote that he'd not call me again. I turned the paper over and looked for an imprint of a second sheet. There was none. I folded it and put it with the rest. I thought about the monk. He wrote a list and drew a bell and boiled something in chalk. He lived in a gap and did what he could with the tools he had. He fed people. He carried water. He tried to count. I don't know if he was right or wrong. I know that he's dead. That isn't wisdom. That's an anchor. It drags the story to the ground. The next time I went on air, I cut the opening shorter than usual. I didn't talk about 3 and 4. I talked about how a test can look like a window and be a mirror, and how some rooms teach you to stand still, and how a bell can sound like a memory you never had. I talked about one man who chose not to measure his life to death. I didn't tell anyone what to do. I don't have that job. I told them a clerk in a cold room wrote sine scintilla, and that the phrase can be a trap and a tool depending on the hand that holds it. Then I turned the light off and listened to the silence in the cabin and let it be just silence. I didn't pull it apart. Weeks later, in a library basement where the air smelled like clean paper and dust, I saw a small note pinned to a corkboard. It was a photocopy of a bell. It had a number and a yoke and a lip. Someone had written under it in a careful hand, "It doesn't ring on its own." The thumbtack held the paper at one corner so it hung a little crooked. I left it there. I walked upstairs and felt the weight of each step as if the building had grown heavier while I read. Out on the street, the traffic moved like it always does, a long breath in metal. A boy tugged a dog that didn't want to cross the wet paint. A woman in a yellow raincoat laughed at something no one else heard. A man looked up at the sky as if there were an answer there. If there was a ratio under any of it, it stayed politely out of sight. If there was a well under the city, I couldn't hear the bucket. The bell in my head was quiet. I drove home with the radio off, the wipers tapped, the road unrolled. The cabin took me in like it always did. I put the kettle on and stood by the window while the water warmed, and when the kettle clicked, I didn't jump, not even a little. I noticed that and let it pass. I made tea and didn't write about bells for a long time. The folder stayed on the shelf. The pencil letters on the tab faded where my hand had touched them. When I cleaned the room, I dusted around it and left it where it sat. I didn't lock it up and I didn't throw it away. Some stories don't close. They reduce heat until they're safe to hold. You carry them that way. You don't ring them to see who comes. You don't feed them bread. One winter evening, when the light on the lake went gray and the trees made thin lines against the sky, I took the recorder down and spoke the last thing I'll say about this. I said the noise inside a person doesn't prove they're alive, and the stillness doesn't prove they aren't. I said the tests we make are reflections of our fear. I said a clerk with cold fingers wrote a phrase that outlived him, and a modern man with a careful voice tried to make peace with it. I said that was enough for now. Then I stopped the tape and let the cabin be a cabin. I listened to the world hum the plain tune it always hums when we stop trying to be the conductor. I've not heard the bells since. If it rings again, I hope I don't hear it first. I hope it rings in a field where the only witness is the sky. If the well answers, I hope it writes my name wrong. I hope it writes it so badly no one can read it and make a list. That isn't fear. That's a wish for quiet of a better kind than the one in the file. The kettle clicked again in the kitchen. I didn't jump. I went to make tea.